Welcome. I'm John Behrens, Professor of the Practice and Director of the Technology and Digital Studies program in the College of Arts and Letters. I'm pleased to say that I'm also your host for the new AI series brought to you by ThinkMD. Today's event is the second event in a series in which we will be bringing cutting-edge thought leaders to discuss what is happening in the world of AI. It's our hope that over the course of this year, we will share the journey of understanding the opportunities and challenges of these exciting and daunting computational changes of the new AI, and empower ourselves to be stewards of, rather than victims of, these changes. As of November 30th, we are now 1 year into the ChatGPT era, and one of the most pressing concerns we hear from all quarters is, how will this affect the future of work, and what are the implications for my job and the jobs of those around me? To discuss this topic, I have Notre Dame's resident expert and an international leader on the topic, Yong Lee. Welcome to the series, Yong.
Thank you very much for having me, John. Nice to see you.
Thanks, you too. I just want to say a few things about Yong's background. Yong Lee is an assistant professor of technology, economy, and global affairs in the Keough School of Global Affairs here at Notre Dame. He's also a faculty affiliate of the McKenna Center for Human Development and Global Business, and a faculty fellow of the Keough School of Kellogg's Institute for International Studies, the Pulte Institute for Global Development, and the Institute for Asia and Asian Studies. His research explores the way artificial intelligence and robotics affects labor and the governance and ethical issues related to these technologies. With all those jobs, I don't know how he gets any sleep, but he's very productive and well respected and loved here at Notre Dame. Now, during the preparation for this episode, Yong and I discussed the reality that while most people are very interested in the new AI, generative AI, and ChatGPT in particular, many people have never actually seen it or heard it. So rather than jump into the discussion in the abstract, we thought we'd start with a few demonstrations. One of the nice features about the most recent versions of ChatGPT is there's an iPhone application that will allow you to speak to it, but will also speak back. So we're just going to do a demonstration or two with this application. I want you to write a press release saying that John Behrens is the new provost at the University of Notre Dame. He is an AI expert.
All right, let's draft a press release for that announcement. For immediate release, University of Notre Dame appoints John Behrens as new provost. Notre Dame IN, the University of Notre Dame, proudly announces the appointment of John Behrens as its provost. Behrens, distinguished expert in artificial intelligence, brings a wealth of knowledge and innovative vision to the university. John Behrens, renowned for his extensive work in AI, is set to lead Notre Dame's academic, fostering a culture of excellence and forward thinking. His expertise in AI and its applications in education, instrumental in shaping the university's academic strategies and research initiatives. Behrens' appointment as provost marks a significant step.
Fascinating.
I want you to rewrite that press release for a fifth grader.
Sure, here's a simpler version of that press release, made easy for a fifth grader to understand. Big news from Notre Dame University. Hey everyone, guess what? Notre Dame University has just chosen John Behrens to be their provost. Really important job at the university. John is super smart in something called artificial intelligence, which is all about making computers and robots really clever. John is going to help Notre Dame do lots of cool things with technology and learning. He's going to make sure everyone at the university learns lots of new and exciting stuff, especially about computers, how they can be really smart. Everyone at Notre Dame is really happy and excited to have John join them.
Boy, I'm going to have this make all my marketing. Okay, one more. Rewrite that press release in Spanish.
Absolutely. Here's the press release translated into Spanish for a fifth grader. Grandes noticias de la Universidad de Notre Dame. Hola a todos, ¿adivinen qué? La Universidad de Notre Dame acaba de elegir a John Behrens como su nuevo provost, que es un trabajo muy importante en la universidad. John es súper inteligente en algo llamado inteligencia artificial, que se trata de hacer que las computadoras y los robots sean muy listos.
All right. Well, thanks for bearing with me on that, Young. These systems can do many, many kinds of things. And in the materials associated with this cast, we also have links to other demonstrations that the listeners and the viewers can watch. So, Yang, when we do those kind of activities, the system is doing things that look like they're part of my job. I'm writing a press release, translating things for various audiences. I have demos on the website where it analyzes data and then uploads the data and puts it into a PowerPoint. It feels like the future of work is already the present of work. What do we know about how people are using these things and what's happening right now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. This particular technology that we call large language models or generative AI was publicly released just a little bit about a year ago. So it's actually quite new. So we don't really know how much or to what extent different type of workers are using this. We know that certain occupations are using it more so than the other. For instance, you can imagine occupations that require writing or generating content. We can imagine this is being used quite extensively. And even as a teacher myself, use this extensively. You can think about to create content, to create slides. Even I sometimes use it to give case studies or examples. It is being used quite a bit, but nonetheless, I think there's a big part of the population still unaware of its potential. And as we discussed before, I think there's a need to enlighten people of its potential as well. But there's also the other side. There's going to be occupations that probably don't use this as much, most likely to occupations that require physical tasks, bricklayers, or for instance, archaeologists. They probably wouldn't use this technology directly in their tasks. So there's going to be some discrepancy at this point with this current level of technology in the variation of how it's being used across occupations.
Great. And now, so you mentioned jobs that are highly focused on writing. So when we hear that, we think professors, we think lawyers, but we think marketing, and I gave a marketing example. But how do we think about whether there's writing that runs across at a level across lots and lots of disciplines? So I'm thinking, for instance, HR, people have to write job descriptions and they have to write letters. In sales, people have to write letters and follow-up calls. Is this something that's going to be widely impactful, or do we think it'll be more specialized?
Oh, I think it's going to be widely impactful. These models are becoming increasingly powerful. It's not catered to specific type of occupations or tasks. Translation is one. Now you can use it to actually create novels or stories, press releases, summarize. So it's aspects related to summarizing any content or even creating new content or even brainstorming ideas or even asking for recommendations on tasks. It could be used in a variety of activities and will have an all-encompassing effect on all types of writing.
Okay. Now, right now, I'm not worried about my job because I think I'm smarter than it, and I'm finding it useful in lots and lots of different ways. But I know lots of people are worried about their jobs. And how do you think about when we should be worried and when we should not be worried, of where the threats are hurting somebody's kind of job situation and where there's just kind of excitement? And great, John, I'm going to save you time.
Yeah, that's a great point. A nice framework, and economists often use this framework, is to think about to what degree it's complementing certain tasks of our occupations and substituting certain tasks. And the idea is that each occupation, we have a spectrum of tasks. As a professor, there's going to be a variety of tasks that you do. As a doctor, there's going to be a variety of tasks that a doctor does. And you can think about whether, okay, certain tasks might be complemented by this technology and it's making us more productive in some sense. And it will not be able to substitute a certain type of task. For instance, me standing in front of students and actually teaching. So there's going to be a spectrum of tasks that will be complemented by this technology and a spectrum of tasks that could be substituted. So if it's complementing certain tasks, making me productive while I can focus on some other aspects of my task, In that case, I think it's a good thing. It'll make us productive. We might require a bit of training, changing our focus in certain tasks over others, but I think it won't get rid of my occupation. But there are going to be occupations where it's going to substitute a bunch of his tasks. And then complementing isn't, there maybe not much left in terms of which task it would actually complement. If you think about a translator right now, I think those occupations, which primary task is actually translating, could be at risk in the near future. So I think that's a good way to think about it. What share of my task will be complemented versus substitute?
Is this analogous to what we had in the 80s when people said, well, accountants are going to go away, they're going to be replaced by spreadsheets? And up until that time, certain of us remember those days where people actually did accounting by hand with a pencil and
Yeah.
actually had to do arithmetic. But accountants didn't go away. We have plenty of accountants. But what we have is the computation is done by the spreadsheet. Are you thinking when you say composite, is it something like that?
So that I think there's a more nuance to that. And the way to think about this is also complementing, but also new task creation. So initially bookkeepers, traditional accountants were doing it by hand and paper. Now with the advent of Excel and spreadsheets, they were able to move to accounting using Excel, but also provide new types of advices, tax recommendations, etc. So there's this aspect that by allowing them to reduce the amount they spend on actual bookkeeping, they were able to do other potentially more productive tasks or new types of tasks. So there's a shift that happens when new technologies are being adopted. And this new task creation is going to be a very key component in terms of whether certain occupations survive or thrive or transform.
Okay, great. Now, we're talking about the future, but we've kind of started with the present. But there's kind of a gap, it seems to me, between what people are saying the future is going to be and the reality we have right now. So we've had a year of ChatGPT. Before that, we had an earlier version of the system, GPT-3, and it really wasn't great. ChatGPT was dramatically better. GPT-4 in March was dramatically better. And we're hearing all this discussion about how things are going to change. Like we said, it's already changing how you and I work. But the kind of the hype and kind of the promise sounds still so far away from the actual reality where I'm struggling to get ChatGPT sometimes to do exactly what I want it to do. Where do you think we are in the kind of the evolution and the rollout into the economy of these kind of systems?
Well, as you pointed out, it's only been 1 year, but it's been an amazing year. Talked about this before, but it can code, right? In terms of the need to actually learn how to code, the way we see this in the future could change. It could be more just about the idea of what you want to code, and whatever generative AI model you have will actually create those code for it. So in terms of the potential, it's moving so fast that I think it is valid to be worried about potential, that it will have widespread economic impact across different occupations and industries. It's hard to know what was actually going on a few weeks ago within OpenAI, but one of the key things that people have been discussing is that the new model is so powerful that it actually caused quite a bit of stir within the community, right? ChatGPT 4 is just amazing. People are just using the free version of ChatGPT 3 or 3.5 and finding that, oh, this is not great. If you try ChatGPT 4, you will notice the enormous difference. So if you think about the newer model, I would imagine there's going to be very surprising things that we hadn't even predicted.
Right. And when you mention OpenAI from a few weeks ago, could you just tell the audience a bit about what happened and what your take on that is?
Yeah, sure. The CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, was suddenly fired by the board of OpenAI, and it wasn't clear what the exact reason for that was. What happened was a massive scramble on Microsoft saying that they would rehire Sam Altman and he could bring his own team, but also internally within OpenAI, there was a backlash among the employees to reinstate Sam Altman. But despite all of this drama going on, the board was not very clear in the reasoning behind why they fired Sam Altman, ultimately saying that he wasn't very transparent in his communications. later on, there was this one story that came out that was publicly released, was that one of the board members wrote an article saying that OpenAI's ChatGPT model could potentially cause harm, whereas their competitor, which is Anthropic Claude, does better in these risk management models. So that was a public story. But of course, this is speculation, but there's been chatter within Silicon Valley, and now it's pretty well known that there's this new model, newer version of ChatGPT that was so powerful that even the board members were somewhat skeptical about whether or not to move forward and release this version. So that's the extent of the story of that I know of.
Well, from my perspective, it was exciting to see some real Hollywood soap opera drama coming out of Silicon Valley. It wasn't Elon Musk and it wasn't Jeff Bezos and their personal lives. It was actual kind of drama. I'm sure that the Hollywood folks are running around trying to get the rights to the story, and the writers are going crazy with ChatGPT to make that happen right now. But fascinating. Now, some of the people have talked about, well, maybe this is a big story about governance because OpenAI was originally a nonprofit company, kept its nonprofit board, and then started the for-profit arm of OpenAI that has made all the leaps and bounds because they were able to get the investment that the nonprofit side wasn't. So attention in the different kinds of goals and this idea of a board member criticizing publicly its own company can lead to some of that kind of tension. And of course, the board was smaller as well. And so there's general kind of governance issues going on there. But an amazing month for OpenAI, because at the beginning of the month, they announced all these new features, including these new GPTs. And a GPT is like a little mini ChatGPT that you can train yourself and customize yourself, as well as the availability of speech to text, which is you speak it and then it goes into text and text to speech, which is what we saw in the iPhone at the beginning of our segment here. And so this kind of continued evolution of not only one thing getting better, like the text, but also new modalities, the speech to text, the text to speech. And also, you could take pictures now with this iPhone application. I could take pictures, tell me what the picture is, and then you can use the text processing. So really an explosion of what they call multimodal, really an explosion of things happening in just this one company. And it makes me just wonder about all the other things going on. And that leads me to my next question, Yong, which is, we talked about like ChatGPT, which is a specific instance of these kind of technologies, generative AI technology. But one of the things we're seeing in the market is that the next generation of companies like Adobe, where their specialty isn't AI in general, but they had AI groups, and now they're starting to put AI in their products. People have had Photoshop for 20 years. People manually move the parts of the image around, but now in the new version, you can circle something and say, generate a castle or generate a lighthouse or generate a person into this place. In the same way that text gets generated, there's also image generators, and they're being integrated. So it seems to me that even if you're not that interested in learning about generative AI or ChatGPT, kind of jumping in and getting the skills that you and I now have, the systems underneath us are going to change anyway. And Microsoft Word's going to have it, and Adobe Photoshop already has it. What's your thinking about how that's going to change the economy and change the world, whether in a sense we want it or?
That's a great point. Maybe I'll first talk about the multimodality part and then to the economy part, because I think we're at a new junction where ChatGPT came out. It was all natural language processing, a language-based model. But I was just at a conference last week, and it was a well-known computer scientist talking about who was a computer visionist, basically believing that models need to be trained on vision because vision actually describes the actual world. But he's been convinced that just by text, that text can actually create vision in a structured way. We can actually just instruct with words to create the physical environment visually. And he was surprised of the performance of this, that somehow just the models are understanding the structure of the physical reality or images based on the way we describe it. So in the context of Adobe, yes, we can just say that, okay, add a person here, add a background where the scenery is like Yosemite, and then it can actually put those in just based on the text. And you can imagine how visual or computer graphics, graphic designs will change. So, and this will happen in a variety of contexts. Different companies, like you said, Microsoft Word, different programs, different companies will have their own generative AI models that are specifically tailored to their purposes. And I think that's a good thing because one of the key, what should I say, concerns right now with these large language models is privacy. It's using a lot of data from a variety of sources and creating these generated contents. But sometimes we don't want these data to be public. Certain companies don't want to share their data, but they do want to take advantage of the potentials of generative AI. And the idea is that if companies or different mediator can create intermediate platforms where people can use for their own purposes, it could be more safe in some sense and could get more control for each individuals or the company. So I think it's a good thing. Also, as an economist, competition can actually be helpful in terms of promoting not only just innovation, but in this safeguarding as well. I do see it as a potential positive to the economy rather than having OpenAI or a few big tech actually dominating or monopolizing generative AI.
Some of my background is in psychology. And one of the things, to go back to this, what you were saying about multimodal, one of the things that I wonder sometimes is whether the technologists, from my perspective as a psychologist, technologists sometimes forget some of the complexities of human behavior and human cognition. So for instance, a sentence, 5 words, as a statement about an image or a picture. Well, there might be a million ways to do a picture that represents those 5 words. Give me a picture of a man on a beach. Well, is it sunny? Is it not sunny? Is the water high? Is the water low? Is there sand? Are there rocks? So there's sometimes these asymmetries in the representation, which is why humans have we have separate memory systems for images and text or propositions or language. And I wonder sometimes whether we get a little bit of armchair philosophy because we anthropomorphize, we think about these systems as human when we haven't thought through all the implications of what that might mean. I was very interested in your comment about talking about that computer scientist and the multimodality, because sometimes it looks exciting and then you get in the details and it's like,
Yeah.
it's more complicated than we thought.
That's right. That's a good point. So it gets to the point, like we go from these large language models to multimodal models, but can we actually get to super intelligence or artificial general intelligence that really resembles human, not just in terms of knowledge, but the experience or even the emotions, right? Can we actually get to that point? And initially, I also thought that this is a statistical model where we're just making predictions. Fictions are getting better. That's different from humans. But I don't know. I feel like I am more surprised because of the way these models are structured is to emulate the brain, the neurons, right? And somehow the surprising thing is that we didn't expect this model to learn certain domains. It wasn't even, say, suppose we train a model on 4 domains, biology, social science, history. But somehow it can make very knowledgeable and rational inference on, say, political science. And these are things that are actually happening right now. And it's because somehow as it learns the structures of from language of how humans or how our societies work, it's able to make actually informed statements. And once I think about and dwell about that, I do feel like it's just beyond the simple statistical model that it is learning things that we don't know how it's learning. And it's very similar to how a young child, as our babies or kids learn how to walk, learn how to speak. It's more similar to that than a statistical model. And if I think of that about it that way, then the potentials seems pretty amazing and scary at the same time.
Well, let's circle that back around to how people work in their work setting. So sometimes I'll give demos and I'll do a demo like I did today, which is write a press release to do blah, blah, blah. And somebody in the audience undoubtedly will get very upset and their eyes will get big and they'll say, they just did my job. And often my response is, well, that's probably not really your job, because it's probably your job to decide, just like it was my job to decide. That's actually the thing that I want to do today. Because my goal is to teach the audience about how these things work. So I decided that that's what we're going to do. And because I decided I understand the audience. And even if I wanted ChatGPT's help, I would have to explain that to ChatGPT. And I could ask ChatGPT to help me with the run of the show, the kinds of things that we do in the show here, but I didn't, because I want to make it very personal.
Yeah.
Not opposed to it, might do it another time. But this idea that sometimes we think of things as big blocks, but the marketing leader needs to decide, well, what's the message? What's the target audience? What's acceptable and not acceptable? So sometimes we see these tasks, but there's like a framework of meta tasks or prior tasks that have to go into those. And sometimes we don't recognize the whole full business of doing that. Just in teaching, you go up the front of the room, you're just not reading slides that you made or learned before. You're interacting with the students, you're thinking about what's happening, you're thinking about their reaction, you're thinking about current events. Do you have any thoughts about how this plays out into some of these future of work studies where they just take very grand or gross descriptions? The lawyers are very text oriented, or lawyers have lots of templates. But in fact, if we try to uncover the layers of cognition and goal setting, it might be more complicated. Do you have any thoughts about kind of work, cognitive complication versus kind of obvious tasks that people do?
Yeah, that's a good point. So in some sense, if I understood correctly, the occupations that we are doing, going back to the task story, is that there's going to be parts of our occupations that requires more cognizant thinking or strategizing or creative thinking. And if we think about this tool as an enabler of those tasks, then we could think about, it could reconfigure what we do as a certain occupation rather than it simply placing us. So I think there's that potential. It could provide us of a new way of thinking about what our occupations should look like in the future. And that's the potential that we don't know. And that's the creativity that will be required among workers, business leaders. But I think the reality is also there's going to be another side that certain occupations will have less of that margin where they can venture out and recreate themselves, become more creative, and a big chunk of their jobs can actually be replaced by this technology. So whether that implies to more increased inequality across different occupations, but also in some sense within the same occupation, there's going to be a set of people that you describe who are able to think more about, how should I reconfigure my occupation, my task? And those who might be less inclined to do so or unable to do so. So there's going to be within occupation variation in terms of status and productivity, as well as across occupation implication.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes I hear the expression, you won't be replaced by AI. You'll be replaced by somebody that knows how to use AI.
Yeah. That's right.
So, yeah. Now you talked about within occupation variability, which means that multiple people have the same job, but even within the same job, some people are going to be more successful than other people. What about globally? Do you think there's global impacts here? Some parts of the world will be more advantaged than other parts of the world? Or do you think it's pretty spread evenly? It's not really a geographic or political issue. It's just a skill issue.
Well, I think there's substantial inequality right now, especially related to generative AI. We've been talking about inequality in AI for a while, given so focused on a subset of countries, the US being the leader, and then several countries in Asia and Europe. But especially with generative AI or large language models, this is trained in English. And these models perform substantially well in English compared to any other language. And so there's already that gap, right, across countries. So if you were even to use this tool and try to create productivity benefits, there's going to be already just variation across countries because the capabilities of these models vary. At some point, I think this will be equalized as other countries develop their models. So there's that aspect of that. But as we know, the ability to train these models require enormous resources. I forget these numbers, but they're surprisingly, the resources that goes into training these large language models are so expensive. That's why not many companies can actually do this. Not just companies, but also countries are unable to do.
Yeah.
So even in terms of access, there's already a lot of inequality.
Yeah. And then, so just to put some scale to that, Andrei Karpathy, one of the scientists at AI, he has a video where he talks about this idea, and just to make it more concrete for the listeners, this idea of training the model. So these systems in general, they start with a lot of data, mostly scraped from the internet, but could be from databases. You can imagine, for instance, Google, when they make theirs, they have lots of databases that they might take it from. They put it in a giant statistical model, which kind of is like, you could think about, it's not exactly this way, but think about it as like correlations between words. When this word happens, these other words happen. And to make that statistical model, you have to run the computers for weeks. And that can cost tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. And when you're talking about resources, that's part of what you're talking about. And then after that, there's usually another process of kind of more detailed training with very specific human instructional data. You did a good job here, you did a bad job here, and so forth. So that you're saying that creates a huge kind of cost of entry that is not going to support a very small country with a very rare language kind of making their own system, both because the data won't be available and the cost to do that will be prohibitive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now let's go back to the privacy conversation for a minute, because part of what's happened is when you interact with these systems, it may be the case in some systems that the data that you interact with it, my request today, that might end up, if you don't have the right settings set and you don't have the right version, could actually get in the training data in the future. And that's part of the place people are concerned about privacy. And that has led to lots of companies just flat out saying, we don't want to use it. So like here at Notre Dame right now, we all have the Google suite, which means we have Google Slides, we have Gmail, but we don't have access to Bard because the security folks are still making sure that if they turn Bard on, which is a large language model like ChatGPT, that people will accidentally put student data in there or accidentally put personal information. I might say something about my family that I wouldn't want in the system.
Yeah.
So that's is that part of what's making this gap that we talked about between kind of the implementation reality and the possibility of it?
That's a good point. I don't know to what extent privacy has actually hindered the development of these models, because that part is the ownership part, the privacy part, the copyright part is still, there's no set rule actually. These models are able to use this data. There are several lawsuits, I believe, going on related to this. There was the author, a novelist, who sued OpenAI because her novel actually showed up in a very similar format in OpenAI's ChatGPT model. So the issue is definitely there, and it is a very important issue in terms of whether that actually has hindered, whether there's regulation that actually is limiting. Hasn't been very clear from my understanding. So what's happening, I think, is more of an ex post again. Most of these are ex post patchwork. Once is, can we come up with a safe way? Initially, ChatGPT, it explicitly stated that we'll be using your data. But now newer versions are saying that, okay, we'll try. If you don't want us to use your data, we'll give you that option. I believe there's that option now. I'm not sure. Is that right?
Yeah, you can turn it off in the paid version. Yeah.
Turn it off now. And those models, I think, will appear more. And I think that's the part of competition. As more models compete for consumer uses, they'll have a better privacy setting. So I think that's one thing that's happening. But also there's this movement towards something called sandboxing, where we're going to constrain the use within a certain community and let the data live there. So there are innovations happening in that regards. Yeah, I think but it hasn't hindered development yet.
Right. Might be hindering some of the implementation, like the BARD example I gave here, but the
Definitely.
companies are still full bore waiting for those kinds of things to
Yeah.
bear out. So you
Yeah.
brought up the issue of copyright, and this gets to the idea of how I said they typically start with lots of data off from the internet. It could, if it's an image generation system, it'll be a lot of images. If it's a text generation system, it'll be a lot of text. And then there's problems on two sides of that. So on the one side is there's always some concern about whether the data that's been put in properly was appropriately used through the copyright law. And you gave that example of a writer who believes that their work was put into these systems, and it's not, the legal status of that is not clear. But on the other side, there's also a problem where the copyright authority in the United States government is not giving copyright to computer generated systems. So from a future of work perspective, it sounds to me like there's value problems for using it in workforce context on both sides.
That's right. Yeah. So suppose one uses generative AI, like models like DALL-E or Journey, to create an image and use it for within a book, within an article, for advertising. In that case, where does the copyright exist? I guess that's the tricky part. And I'm not a legal expert, so I won't have anything insightful to say on that, but I know this is an issue that is coming up. And the way regulation, I think that I know a little bit more about that side, is thinking about this is, should we come up with tools like watermarking outputs? Okay, this was generated from a certain model. So we have these outputs. So, and then this will be helpful if we think about video content that are generated, then people are informed that the content was actually generated by certain type of generative AI. And people are thinking about, oh, can we even put certain levels of these watermarking? Whether that will be useful, how it will be enforced, whether they embed this automatically in the model so that whatever type of output that's been generated, OpenAI or whatever DALL-E would actually have to have a watermark. I think that's an open question. But yeah, at some point, something like that could happen, or you can even think about the opposite, where in the future, these models are so widely used, the de facto could be that, yeah, it's probably used some form of generative AI. And what we actually will value is authenticity, trademarks. Say, oh, this was solely written by me with no input from a generative AI model. So we like an artisan making his or her craft, selling it in the market. So yeah, you could think about different worlds, whether we want to do a positive regulation or a negative regulation. In some sense.
Now, as we go forward in this world where being human might be an asset in that story, what kind of skills should we be preparing? What should we be doing different with students to get ready for this rapidly emerging world? What is going to be valued differently from how it is now?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think the answer might be, I think my students would have liked the answer, but I think you have to be Superman in some sense, in the sense that you have to be very proficient in, not necessarily in coding, but what's going on with these technologies, understanding the models, being able to use it efficiently, but also develop the other side, the more humanistic sides that make us human, so that we can actually differentiate it ourselves, but also make better judgments ethically as well. And those it require better communication skills, there's this literature that actually examines the type of skills that are valued in the market, and increasingly social skills and soft skills are being valued. So in some sense, I would say, okay, you have to be on top of these technologies. Better, yes, be able to code a little bit. I think that'll be great. But also, you actually have to have these different abilities, be able to manage, be able to communicate, have soft skills, think ethically and strategically. So, yeah, I think it's more burden on maybe in some sense on the students, but I think that will be valued in the future.
Yeah. Sometimes I summarize that in terms of words that start with C: collaborate, communicate, create, cogitate, because
Yes.
all those kinds of things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, I talk about this in class, but then how do we actually, our education system is not created, and you're the education psychologist. So our system is not, educational system does not train the four C's that we want hard skill, hard knowledge, and our K to 12 or even college is catered around developing those concrete skills. But the more soft skills, it's hard to know. We learn it during kindergarten, during when we're growing up. But after that, we don't really focus on that much.
Yeah. So that's, I think that's very interesting. I think we could have a whole nother segment on that. But, there are, I think in the American education system, if you think about the classroom, some schools do that, some schools don't. But in some schools, they teach those things in other places. They teach those things in the sports club. You're learning collaboration, teamwork when you're in the sports team, and you're learning communication when you're on the yearbook or on the school newspaper. So sometimes there's different ways that it appears. Even here at the university, there's such a broad range of activities that the students. Sometimes we have to even try to get their attention to get them back in the classroom because they're out consulting and they're out changing the world.
Yeah, that's a very good point, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic, let me make a plug for all the great work that's going on here at Notre Dame. So, for instance, one of the programs that you cross-list into, the Computing and Digital Technologies program, is a minor for students that are interested in computing and digital technologies. And they learn about computer coding. They learn about the social context of computing. And then they have the opportunity to take classes from great leaders like you. You teach the future of work. We cross-list in that. And they take other classes, could be digital peace building, could be AI, auditing AI, just a large, we have a class on generative AI in the wild where students are already doing projects in generative AI in the arts, in English and so on. And actually, I think either our next session or the one after that, we're gonna dive deep into that class and visit with some of the students to see what they're learning about generative AI. So we're laying the foundation, and we love the opportunity to be interacting with the students, but also to bring great experts like you into that classroom.
Yeah.
Let's go back to this idea a little bit about how we think about making the world better in where we're going. And here at Notre Dame, we talk a lot about the idea of the common good and the idea of not leaving anybody behind. What do you think are some of the things that we should be thinking about in terms of the future of work and labor and our responsibility to bring all of society forward, not just the very privileged and the very lucky, but how do we move forward together as a unified society, all brothers and sisters in Christ?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very important question. And I do feel, or I think there is evidence that technology has been increasing inequality in our society. Inequality, in some sense, has been increasing, and with economists debate what are the actual key sources behind the increasing inequality. But I do believe technology is a contributing factor, right? And those who have the resources, have the background, connections to take advantage of technology will do better going forward. As these models become more complex or more diverse, and in some sense, there's certain people who do not have access to these technologies, then we might, that is a concern. So I think going forward, especially as in educational institutions, as teachers, I think one thing I think we should think about is how can we actually bring everyone on board in this important era of change, technological change. Make sure people are not left out in the potential. If people are negatively affected by this, how do we actually help them get back up to this, right? So we'll also think about not just in terms of education, but also in terms of redistribution and programs that can assist people in terms of developing their skills. So yeah, those are the extent that I primarily focus on. But there's a variety of business issues, right? What the role of business should be, what the role of technologists should be and how much regulation should be in place. There's different angles that we can think about this. But I do think that the key issue is that we will be affected by this to varying degrees. And how do we best manage that going forward?
Yeah. Well, Yang, we are lucky to have you at Notre Dame. We're lucky to have you in our classrooms, and we're lucky to have you here today. Thank you so much for your time, easygoing, amiable personality, and we just love the time. And thanks for sharing it with us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Always enjoy talking with you. You're also very easygoing. So yeah, it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much again.
You're welcome. So I just want to say to the audience that thanks so much. This is part of a series. We'll be having another event in January. Look for the announcements about that. Keep your eye open for not only this Think ND series, but I also want to call out that in the spring, our colleagues in the College of Business will have a series called 10 Years Hence, and that will also focus on AI. And we're happy to help them promote this great work that they're doing. Thanks so much for joining in, and have a wonderful holiday.